Some people walk into our lives with a smile and leave with the very same smile. It's just that we no longer have anyone left to smile back at. He once told me, "All you have to do is trust me." And I did trust him, with my whole heart, only to learn that sometimes trusting the wrong person is the fastest way to lose yourself. I trusted him when everyone warned me. I trusted him even when my own heart began to whisper doubts. I trusted him to the extent that I traded sleepless nights, constantly asking myself, is this somehow my fault? Then one day, I realized, love doesn't make you blind. It just makes you pretend not to see. Because if you look straight ahead, you would have to admit that the person you love has never loved you back. I used to smile to keep the peace, while I was completely shattering on the inside. I once called that a sacrifice until I understood. It was just how I taught others to disregard me. I don't know the exact moment he stopped loving me. I only know that by the time I finally realized, it was already too late to salvage my self-respect. And if you've ever loved someone so much that you forgot your own name, if you've ever tried to hold on to a person just to avoid facing an empty room, then stay. Because sometimes, it's not love that kills us. It's the choice we make to remain, even when we know we should have walked away. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we don't lose each other on this journey. The light from the crystal chandelier spilled onto the floor, glittering like melting snow on a dark lake. Laughter echoed through the ballroom, the smooth, polished sound of people accustomed to a world where everything seemed already arranged. I stood near the bar, a glass of champagne in hand, trying to find a patch of real air amidst the measured compliments and calculating gazes. A voice cut through the noise right beside me, deep and clear. "You look more tired than sad." I turned around. The man was wearing a dark blue suit, his tie slightly askew. His smile wasn't forced, just a quiet presence in the loud crowd. I let out a short, quiet laugh. "Really? Really," he said. "Sad people still have a spark in their eyes. You're just trying to stand up straight." I didn't know why that line made my heart sink. Perhaps it had been too long since anyone looked at me long enough to see what was behind the calm exterior. We left the main area, moving toward the balcony where the night air from the San Francisco Bay blew in, carrying the scent of salt and faint alcohol. Below us, the city stretched out, lights blazing like bright veins against the darkness. He talked about his unfinished software projects. I talked about my all-night coding sessions. A conversation between two strangers, yet the rhythm felt like we had known each other for years. We talked for hours, forgetting the time. I remember laughing, a strange kind of laugh, light, like opening a window after a long winter. When he spoke about leaving a big corporation to start over, I heard in his voice the kind of calculated risk I had somehow lost along the way. "Aren't you afraid of failing?" he asked. "I'm only afraid of becoming numb," I answered, realizing I had spoken more truth than usual. He looked at me for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "Good. Because people who still feel are the ones who make things matter." The music inside shifted. Jazz notes drifted out like thin smoke. I was about to leave when he pulled a small, long object from his jacket pocket, glinting silver-purple under the light. A purple pen. "Gifts aren't really my thing," he said, his voice half joking. "But this one, it felt like you." I looked at him, then at the pen. "Because I work late?" "Because you write," he replied. "And because a writer always needs to remember who was the first person who made them want to write." I gently turned the pen over in my hand. The purple shimmered like an unwritten thought. "Sign your dreams," he said, tilting his head with a smile. A small click sounded as I tested the retractable mechanism. Amidst the music and the chatter, the sound seemed meaningless, yet it nestled itself somewhere deep inside. I didn't know it then, But that single tiny sound would be the first thread woven into an entire story, one that was both sweet and dangerous. The quiet click echoed in the space, soft enough to be swallowed by the lingering jazz tune, but to me it was as clear as a heartbeat. I didn't understand why. Perhaps because it didn't sound like an inanimate object, but rather like a soft call. Brandon looked at me, his gaze both curious and somehow knowing. "See," he whispered. "All it takes is one click for every idea to begin." I smiled, to hide something rising in my chest. The comment sounded playful, yet it touched the part of me I rarely let anyone see. The part that believed in signs, in the small details others overlook. I placed the pen back toward his hand, intending to return it, but he shook his head. "Keep it," he said. "Every story needs a beginning." "And if it doesn't have an ending?" I asked. He shrugged, offering a lopsided smile. "Then we'll write one." Outside, the wind from the bay picked up, making the white curtain billow sideways. I saw the reflection of the two of us on the glass door. Two figures standing close, yet still with space between them. The golden light washed over his face, making everything feel both real and dreamlike. When the party ended, I walked out of the hotel. His cologne lingered on my wrist. I passed under the curved awning just as the first raindrops began to fall. In my purse, the purple pen lay still, as if holding someone's warmth. I believed it was a signal of destiny. Not the loud, dramatic kind of destiny, but the delicate, thread-like kind that connects two people who don't yet understand why they met. I'm not the type of woman who believes in metaphysics. I believe in planning, in logic, in what can be programmed. But that night, when that click sounded, I found myself believing that some things simply don't need a reason. In the days that followed, he began to appear more often, sometimes at a conference, sometimes just a text asking, "Do you still have the pen?" And I would reply, "Yes, I'm using it to sign contracts." He'd text back, "Good. Your dream is getting its first signature." His words always found a way to slip into the space between my logic and my emotion. I knew I should be cautious, but who guards themselves against the one person who makes them feel utterly seen? He said I reminded him of when he started, fearless, driven by pure desire. I said he reminded me that I could still smile. It's funny how lonely people often recognize each other without an introduction. One evening I sat alone in my office, the white light stark against my keyboard. I clicked the pen in my hand. Click. The sound echoed in the empty space, carrying with it the memory of the gala night, the smell of wine, and his gaze. I imagined him somewhere out there, in the sleeping city, hearing that sound too, remembering. I didn't know then that it was also the first sound of the trap. A trap made not of chains but of perfectly timed attention, of a gaze that made one feel safe. Over time, every time the pen clicked, I felt an invisible thread pulling me closer to him. I began sending him ideas, software designs I hadn't dared to publish. He listened, offered feedback, and called me brilliant in a way that validated every effort I made. And so, little by little, I opened the door to my heart, unaware that I was also opening another door. A door that, once closed, would take me a very long time to find my way back out of. That night, as I placed the purple pen on my desk, the reflected light made it glow like a promise. A promise no one had spoken aloud, but which I had already chosen to believe. 6 months later, we got married in Monterey. That morning, the ocean stretched out to meet the sky. A thin mist lay over the cliffs like a silk scarf, and the wind carried the sharp, salty taste of the sea. I remember standing in a simple white dress, no lace, no fuss. Just a clean, minimalist cut, much like the person I was before he arrived. The guest list was small. mostly as colleagues and a few friends I had once believed would stay in my life longer. We exchanged polite conversation, laughing more than necessary. I still recall the moment he held my hand before the altar. The light reflecting in his eyes made everything seem to move in slow motion. "I will protect you from this world that moves too fast." He said it just as the wind swept through, making my veil flutter slightly. That single sentence, not a vow, not flowery language, made me cry. Cry like a child. Not from overwhelming happiness, but because deep down I realized how utterly exhausted I was from protecting myself for so long. I remember the gentle squeeze of his hands, the sound of the waves in my ear, the laughter of people behind me, all slowly blurred. All that remained was the sound of the wind across my shoulder, and the taste of salt mixing with my tears. Part of me knew no one can protect anyone forever. But the other part, the one that had been neglected during years of working, trying to be strong, trying to keep myself intact, wanted to believe that this time would be different. After the ceremony, we drove along the coastline. The sunset dyed the road pale gold, illuminating the seabirds flying against the wind. Brandon put on old music, the kind he said, only those who have been lonely understand. I rested my head on his shoulder, listening to him talk about his plans, his projects, and the word us woven into every sentence. In that moment, I didn't think about the past, nor did I fear the future. I only saw myself, small, vulnerable, and worthy of being loved. I used to think strength meant needing no one, but in his eyes, for the first time, I saw that vulnerability could also be a form of trust. I remember quietly saying, "Are you sure? This world changes so quickly." He smiled. "That's why you need someone who won't." I smiled too, turning to look at the sea. The wind through my hair was cold yet soothing. At that time, I didn't know that some promises are made not to be kept, but to draw us into a place where there is no turning back. We celebrated with wine and nameless dreams. The dinner was small, just the two of us and a bottle of Pinot Noir he brought from Napa. The restaurant was perched on the cliff, glass walls opening up to the dark sea, the waves beating steadily like a peaceful heart. I remember the scent of scented candles blending with the wine, and his eyes reflecting a soft golden glow, like a promise signed not with paper, but with breath. "Cheers," he said, clinking glasses. "To what?" I asked. "To us finding each other before the world could swallow us whole." We laughed, the clink of the glasses sounding softly. Outside, the thin mist crept lower, obscuring the distant lights. I asked him if he thought we were moving too fast. He shook his head. "Life doesn't wait for anyone. When something is right, you just grab it." I looked at him, his confident eyes, his slightly proud smile. He had a way of speaking that made others want to believe. And I did. I told him about my growing company, the software drafts I hadn't dared to release for fear they weren't perfect. He listened, nodded, and then offered to help. "You write code with heart," he said. "I'll just add some logic to protect it." I felt an incredible lightness then. Maybe because for the first time, someone didn't see my work as a burden a woman shouldn't carry. He saw me, not just as his future wife, but as a person whose private world deserved respect. I smiled, taking another sip of wine. "Do you think love can survive among logic and code?" He replied, "If love has no logic, it will always win." I believed him. I believed love could stand against the whole world, against loneliness, against the fatigue of always having to be right, to be strong. I believed that when someone stood beside me, I couldn't fall. He took my hand, his palm warm. "We'll build our own world," he said, like a promise whispered in the wind. Afterward, we walked along the beach. My shoes sank into the wet sand, the hem of my dress lightly touching the waves. The wind blew harder, pulling my hair back. I tilted my head to the sky, faint stars twinkling through the mist. Brandon draped his coat over my shoulders, smiling. "Someday we'll have a house here. Just us. No noise." "And what if the waves wash it away?" I asked. "Then we rebuild it," he said, so quickly that I believed nothing could deter him. That night, back in the room, I placed the purple pen on the bedside table. He commented, "I still see you working with it." I smiled. "It brings good luck." He gently touched the pen, then my hand. "It brought you to me." I stayed silent. There are some sentences that, if you add another word, will break the moment. I softly leaned into his chest, listening to his heartbeat, listening to the distant waves. In my head, everything slowly merged. Work, love, the future. All like a smooth, error-free data stream. When he fell asleep, I opened my laptop and wrote a few lines of code. In the corner of the screen, the save icon blinked. I clicked it. That sound, soft, dry, familiar, reminded me of the first night. I didn't know then that the most dangerous world was named us. A world built on trust, but that trust had no walls. I couldn't see it. No one sees it, when love begins to turn into a mechanism. He took control gently, and I locked the door myself with the delusion that being loved meant being safe. The night wore on. Outside, the waves continued to beat against the shore, persistent and cold. I closed my laptop, placed the pen on top, and heard the soft click. I didn't know. That sound, once again, was opening a chapter I wasn't ready to read. Our San Francisco apartment was brightly lit every night. The glass windows reflected the misty sky and the endless stream of traffic below. I was often home late, my jacket draped over a chair, my laptop open on the dining table. The light stayed on, not to welcome anyone, but to make me forget I was working alone. The house by the ocean was different, gentle and quiet. There, the waves knocked against the cliffs rhythmically, like breathing, and mornings always carried the scent of toast mixed with the cries of distant seagulls. We moved between the two locations as if juggling two different paces of life. The city, noisy, hectic. The ocean, silent, seemingly changeless. Brandon called it balance. I called it distance. He was often away, citing business trips. Sudden trips, a neat suitcase, a plausible reason. He'd send texts from different airports, sometimes a photo of a distant workspace with the caption, "Wish you were here." I got used to it, or, at least, I thought I did. I buried myself in code, contracts, and investment proposals. Everything in the company was growing fast. Too fast. New investors, new projects, more calls, more late nights. When working, I lost track of time. There was only the blue light from the screen reflecting on my face, and the sound of typing, mixed with the distant waves echoing from the Bluetooth speaker. One night, I looked up, my shoulders stiff, my eyes dry, my wrists aching. In the middle of my work, he placed a hand on my shoulder. I started. I hadn't heard him come in. "Hey," he said softly. "Take a break." I intended to say I was almost done, but the words were swallowed when I felt his hand rest securely on my shoulder. "I'll take care of the rest," he said. His voice was deep, gentle, carrying a confidence that made me trust him without thinking. I looked at the screen, the incomplete lines of code, a few numbers waiting to be checked, then looked at him. "You know code?" He laughed, No, but I know people. Sometimes what needs fixing isn't in the machine. He sat down beside me, opening a bottle of wine. The smell of cork mixed with his breath, warm and close. He told me the new contract needed my signature, and that he had everything arranged so I just needed to look it over. I glanced at the documents, seeing my name neatly placed among the pages. I meant to read them carefully, but he said, "It's just protocol, trust me." And I, the person who wrote software to check every line of code for errors, failed to notice that I had just skipped the most important thing: reading thoroughly. Outside the window, the city lights trembled in the mist. I hit save on the last file, hearing the familiar click. That small sound brought me relief, as if everything was still under control. Brandon leaned down and kissed my forehead, the scent of wine mixed with his warmth. "You don't have to keep struggling like this," he said, his voice a soothing lullaby. "I'll handle the rest." I wanted to believe him, and I did. Every time I felt stressed, I clicked the pen. That sound, small and dry, echoed in the paper-strewn room, like a private heartbeat. I don't remember when it became a habit. Every time a project deadline loomed, every time a number went wrong, or every time an email from Brandon arrived with the subject line, "We need to talk," I would press it, click, just to feel my mind calm down. Some nights he video called from a distant hotel. Behind him were white curtains and the faint yellow light of a hallway. "You're working late again," he said, half scolding, half caring. "I'm fine," I replied, short and quick, as if saying more would make me weak. He smiled, his voice warm but slightly strained. "Remember, you don't have to do it all alone." I nodded but thought to myself, if not me, then who? When the screen went dark, I picked up the pen again, clicking it one more time. The sound seemed to trace the distance between us. Not geographical, but a distance in something he never understood. I wasn't looking for someone to save me. I just wanted someone to truly stand by my side. The next morning it rained lightly. The city was covered in a thin layer of mist, like a damp cloth wiping the mirror. I walked down the long hallway, coffee in hand, listening to my own footsteps echo. The click from last night repeated in my head, and I realized, sometimes, peace is found not in the noise of attention, but in the silence before the storm. Brandon called just before noon. He said he was on his way to finalize an agreement with a new partner. This could change everything. His voice was fast, full of energy, while I sat in the conference room watching the gray rain slide down the glass. "Are you sure everything is okay?" I asked. "Always. You worry too much." The only sound he left after the call was the wind whistling through his car speaker. I didn't know why my heart was beating so fast. That evening he came home, later than usual. His jacket still carried the scent of someone else's cigarette smoke. I didn't say anything, just watched him walk past, take off his tie and pour a drink. "Long day," he said, not looking at me. I quietly nodded. "Yeah." He turned on music, the sound echoing through the apartment like another layer of fog. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and like a reflex, click. The purple pen was still there, lying exactly where I had left it since the first night he gave it to me. I still believed, but the belief had a crack. Small, like a scratch on a phone screen, not obvious but always catching the light whenever I tried to look straight. He stood behind me, his arms wrapped around the chair, quietly saying, "We're good, right?" I was silent. Part of me wanted to believe his voice, while the other part heard the faint click echoing again. Like the answer I hadn't dared to speak aloud. Night fell, the streetlights outside reflecting on the window glass, dividing my figure, one half bright, one half dark. I sat there, listening to my heartbeat blend with the sound of the clock's hands, and understood that perhaps, when we try too hard to maintain the peace, that is precisely when the storm begins. One night, I heard him speaking softly in the kitchen. "I just need more time." His voice was low, strained, as if suppressing something. That voice was not meant for me. I knew it from the first beat. I rose from the sofa, my bare feet on the cold wooden floor. The beach apartment was utterly silent. There was only the steady sound of the offshore waves hitting the cliffs, and the wind slipping through the doorframe. In the darkness, the faint light from the kitchen cast a long, narrow strip on the floor, like a golden knife blade. The yellow light fell onto the cold floor, the smell of sea wind mixed with metal. The scent was familiar, a blend of salt, steel, and red wine left in a glass. I walked slowly, step by step, my heart beating in sync with the wind. Brandon had his back to me, the phone pressed to his ear. He spoke softly, but every word dropped clearly like metal striking stone. No, I understand. I just need more time. A few weeks. And a short pause. Then he laughed, a low, forced sound. Of course. She doesn't suspect a thing. I stopped right at the doorway. All my senses were hyper-alert, but no words came out. The kitchen was bathed in warm light, the kind of light that once made me feel safe, but now felt alien, cold, and hollow. I tried not to gasp. In my mind, a stream of hypotheses ran through like faulty code. Work, a client, a deal. I tried to find a logical reason, trying to keep logic on his side, but reason couldn't beat my heart, because my heart had clearly heard what my mind hadn't dared to understand. I stood in the dark, hearing the clarity of my own breathing. Each breath felt like a small collision between two worlds, the one I knew and the one I feared. I watched him lean against the kitchen counter, his hand lightly touching the surface, the light catching the silver watch on his wrist. He said something else, his voice fading, then hung up. He didn't turn around. I retreated into the hallway, my steps so light I couldn't even hear them myself. My heart was still beating, but the rhythm was no longer that of someone living in peace. It was the rhythm of someone who had just seen the edge of the abyss. The wind outside continued to blow, bringing the scent of salt and rust. In the living room, moonlight fell upon the purple pen on the table. I looked at it, the small object that once symbolized a dream, now lying still, cold and silent, like a witness. When he walked in, he offered a strained smile, tucking the phone behind his back. A small gesture, but enough to make everything in me freeze. He had never done that, at least not before. Every other time he was comfortable discussing work in front of me, even handing me the phone to look. But tonight his eyes avoided mine, his shoulders tense, as if he had been caught doing something he wasn't ready to tell the truth about. "You're still awake?" he asked, his voice trying to sound calm, but his fingers still gripped the phone behind his back. "I heard you," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. He quietly nodded, stepping closer, a forced smile on his tired face. "Just work," he said, his voice dropping. "A project got delayed. I was explaining it to them." I nodded, letting the words fall between us like a thin veil covering what both of us knew, but pretended not to see. And I pretended to believe. Because sometimes believing is the only way to maintain peace, even when you know that peace is just a fragile surface borrowed from the wind. He stepped closer, poured more wine, and handed the glass to me. "We'll be fine," he said, his eyes seeking to reassure me. "You're working too hard. Don't overthink things." I smiled. "Yes, I know." We stood there, two people in the brightly lit kitchen, each holding half of the truth. He spoke a few more sentences, about meetings, about the upcoming project, about things I used to care about but now sounded like distant noise. When he placed his hand on my shoulder, the gesture no longer made me feel safe, but only evoked the memory of that first gala night, when that hand had been a promise. As he walked past me, a strange scent of cologne lingered, not the scent I had chosen for him. A slight sharpness in the woody note, a touch of the unfamiliar in his presence. I didn't turn my head. I only heard the bedroom door closing softly,
like a period at the end of a sentence that the writer dared not reread. I sat down on the kitchen chair, the yellow light shining on the empty counter. The purple pen lay there, cold, inert. I pressed it experimentally. Click. The sound echoed, round and dry. A part of me wanted to believe it was still the same, like that first night, like his words to sign your dreams. But it wasn't. Now the click echoed like the sound of a heart cracking, small and clear. In that moment, I knew my heart was starting to learn how to be silent. Not silent out of weakness, but because it understood that sometimes words only further shatter things that are desperately trying to hold their shape. I didn't cry. I just sat, quietly, listening to the waves outside crash against the rock, steady and far away. A part of me still wanted to believe him. The other part knew the things he wasn't saying were the most real things of all. I turned off the kitchen light, leaving the room in dim darkness. Before going upstairs, I looked back one last time. The pen was still there, the purple metal reflecting a streak of moonlight on the counter. The click sound still echoed in my head, repeating itself, a small, cold rhythm that wouldn't stop.
That morning, the San Francisco sky was heavy and gray, the clouds hanging low as if about to touch the rooftops. The apartment was filled with cold light, reflecting off the desk cluttered with papers, envelopes, and red numbers flashing on the bank statement screen. I sat still, gripping a cold cup of coffee. Everything in front of me looked like a corrupted line of code. The harder I tried to read it, the more errors I found everywhere. I asked, "How much do you owe?" My voice was hoarse, not loud, not shaky, just exhausted. Brandon sat opposite me, his hair messy, his collar crumpled, his eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept all night. He was silent for a long time. The only sound was the dry ticking of the clock. Finally, he whispered, so quietly he seemed afraid to hear himself. 200,000. No further words, no explanation, no defense. I looked at him. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then I looked around. The room that was once a home now resembled the aftermath of an accident. Everything in its proper place, only the emotion was dead. "What did you use it for?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Investments. Someone recommended it. I thought I could make it back quickly." He lowered his head, his hands clenched until his knuckles were white. "I wasn't going to hide it. I just needed more time." I closed my eyes, hearing that phrase echo. I just need more time. The phrase I had heard in the kitchen, in the middle of the night. He cried. I cried too, but not for the same thing. His tears fell for fear of loss, money, status, the image of a man in control. My tears fell for something else, something money couldn't buy back. Trust. He leaned forward, touching my hand, his voice breaking. "I was wrong. I just wanted to keep you, keep everything." I pulled back. "By lying to me?" "Not lying, just, you wouldn't have understood." I let out a short, hollow laugh. "You're right. I don't understand." I don't understand who the man sitting across from me is anymore. He broke down, his shoulders shaking, his muffled sobs mixed with the sound of rain starting to hit the window pane. I looked at him, seeing the man who once laughed against the Monterey wind now just a shadow, wet, blurred, unable to hold his form. He cried over losing control. I cried over burying the man I loved. No need for a coffin, no need for a funeral. Just a gray morning and a number. In my mind, the click of the purple pen rang out, repeating like an old heartbeat coming to a halt. I turned away, wiping my eyes. "Who do you owe?" "The bank. And a few acquaintances." "Is my name on the contract?" He was silent, just silent. The answer lay in that silence, sharper than a knife. I stood up, walking toward the window. The rain was heavy now, blurring the entire city. I saw my reflection in the glass, the face of someone who had just lost everything but still had to stand tall. I wanted to scream, but no sound could escape. Instead, I only heard the clock hands moving, steadily, relentlessly. In that room, everything was still in its place. Only my heart was no longer in my chest. I remembered the nights he held me through crises. Now that embrace felt hollow. In the past, when my company faced its first setback, he sat with me all night, making coffee, reading every line of the report. When I was tired, he pulled me into his arms and said, "We'll figure it out, always." I believed him, believed in that warmth, believed that we were a team, that if we fell, we would fall together. Now he was still there. Only his gaze was different. No longer a partner, but someone trying to negotiate. He looked up, his eyes swollen red. "I didn't want you to worry. I thought I could handle it." I let out a soft sigh. Do you know what the most painful thing is? It's not the money. It's that you thought I wasn't strong enough to handle the truth. He looked at me, silent.
The light from the window cast a shadow on his face, half bright, half dark. "We'll pay it back together," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "But you have to be honest." A long silence. The rain outside struck the railing, each drop steady, like a count for the quiet. He nodded, slowly. "Okay, I promise." I wanted to believe, even though my heart was fractured, because sometimes people choose to stay not out of love, but out of a need to know how far they have strayed. I gathered the papers on the table, stacking them neatly. Each one bore my signature, a handwriting that was once straight, now slightly trembling at the end of the line. Brandon stood up, poured more wine. The glass tilted, spilling a little onto the table. "Sorry," he murmured, wiping it with his sleeve, forcing a smile. I just watched. Every gesture he made now felt like a rerun of an old role, a role whose every line I once knew by heart. In the middle of the room, he rolled the purple pen across the table. The sound of metal hitting wood was small, then stopped right in front of me. "Sign this," he said, his voice soft, "so I can settle things with them." I looked at the pen, the object that once symbolized our beginning, now lying there cold and indifferent. I didn't touch it immediately. Everything flashed through my mind. The Monterey waves, the wedding ceremony under the salty air. The first night he told me to sign your dreams. Now I only wanted to ask, what did that dream turn into? I picked up the pen, turning it gently in my hand. Click. The click echoed hollowly, like a dead promise. No more rhythm of trust. No more feeling of being seen. Just the sound of something that used to be love, now a piece of evidence in a negotiation. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "You know I didn't mean to." I nodded. I know. But sometimes not meaning to was still enough to kill something. I put the pen back on the table, unsigned, leaving it between us, like a boundary that could not be crossed. Outside, a faint thunder rumbled in the distance. A flash of light shone through the glass, reflecting the purple pen, brightening then fading. I turned away, walking slowly toward the window. The rain continued to fall, steady and cold. In my heart I knew, from today on, every click I heard would never again be the rhythm of peace. The morning I went to the courthouse, it was still raining. The rain was thin, steady, falling on the gray asphalt like endless lines of code with no endpoint. I wasn't wearing black. No makeup, just a long, ash-gray coat.
as if I wanted to blend into the city's anonymous atmosphere. I filed the divorce petition. The clerk looked up, asked a few procedural questions, then stamped the documents. The sound of the stamp hitting the paper was clean and final. Neither painful nor light, just enough to know that everything was officially recorded somewhere, cold and without emotion. When I brought the paper back, Brandon was already sitting in the kitchen. The noon light streamed in sideways, filtering through the white curtain, casting a pale yellow hue on his face, the color of things that were once warm but are now merely an echo of heat. I placed the folder on the table. He looked, unblinking. For a moment I thought I'd hear something, an explanation, a hint of regret, or at least a sigh. But no, he just tilted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth curving, his eyes holding a strange, knowing look. "You finally dared." His voice wasn't exactly mocking, nor bitter, just the statement of a man who still believed he was in control. I looked at him. Dared to do what? Dared to admit it's over. I gave a slight nod, even though deep down I knew he was the one who pulled the plug on this marriage a long time ago. We still ate at the same table, a final, chilling civility between two people whose love had expired, but whose obligations had not. Between us there was only the dry, clear sound of spoons hitting the porcelain bowls. No one mentioned the divorce. No one asked about the next steps. We talked about the weather, stock prices, the new neighbors, distant subjects used to fill the too close, suffocating gap. He ate slowly, deliberately, the same old way, picking up small bites, chewing carefully, taking short sips of wine. I watched him, remembering that I once loved those small details. Now, everything felt like a play being performed one last time for an audience that had already left the theater. I observed him, like watching a role I knew by heart. Every raised brow, every subtle breath he took before a lie, all so familiar that I could predict his next line. He said, "We'll be fine." I replied, "Yes." He offered a light smile, trying to soften his gaze. But the only thing I felt was the distance that had been there for ages, only now bright enough to see clearly. In the room, the scent of the food mingled with the sound of the rain on the patio. I looked down at the white plate, seeing the lingering streak of red wine smeared like dried blood. It struck me. Perhaps a marriage doesn't end with a fight, but with a dinner where no one wants to look into the other's eyes. I stayed, not out of regret, but because there were things that couldn't be finished yet. The house still bore both our names. All the papers, accounts, and ownership were woven together like fibers that weren't easily cut. I also stayed because the evidence wasn't complete. Detective Rivera had told me, "Don't leave until you have the truth." And I understood that to know how deeply someone has lied to you, sometimes you have to keep living with them. The days that followed flowed like a still lake. He still went to work, still sent emails, still asked what I wanted for dinner. On the surface, everything appeared so normal that an outsider would assume we were fine. The only difference was, when our eyes met, both of us quickly looked away, like two actors afraid of forgetting their lines. Each evening I spoke little and listened much. He was on the phone more than before, his voice low, sometimes a quiet laugh, sometimes hanging up quickly when I walked in. I didn't ask. I simply sat at the dining table, opened my laptop, typed lightly to create a sound barrier, and listened to his voice from the living room. Fragmented, soft, but enough to piece together a picture. In the silences, the truth revealed itself. No confession needed. Just the wandering gaze when I mentioned his old company's name. Just the hotel bill in a misdelivered envelope. Just the sound of a text message, echoing at midnight, followed by the silence that swallowed the word sorry. I learned to observe, without judgment, without confrontation. My composure made him more wary, and it kept me calmer. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down, knowing you could fall, but still wanting to see how deep the drop was. Sometimes he would come close, touch my shoulder gently and say, "I know you still care." I replied, my voice steady, "If I didn't care,
I would have left already. He laughed, but there was a flicker of fear in his smile. When night fell, the house became too still. The sound of the waves from the bay echoed in, steady, cold. I sat alone at my desk, the unsigned file in front of me, the purple pen beside it. I picked it up, turning it gently in my hand. Click. I pressed the pen, hearing it like a silent vow in the darkness, a vow that needed no witness, only myself. I would wait. Wait until the truth spoke in its own language, not through tears or empty promises. Outside, the rain fell again. The light from the window illuminated the desk, tracing a thin streak across the pen's barrel. I looked into it, seeing my distorted reflection in the metal. A woman who no longer believed, but was sober enough not to collapse. In that house, I lived like a guardian of a secret, waiting for the day it would fully expose itself to the light. And every time I pressed the pen, the click sounded, small, but clear, like the heartbeat of someone who trusts no one but herself.
I met him at a small cafe on Market Street, where the afternoon light slanted through the large window, casting faint golden streaks onto the wooden tables. The place was nearly empty, save for the sound of the coffee grinder and the gentle patter of rain outside the awning. I was there to meet Detective Rivera. The man sat in the innermost corner, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver at his temples. He wore a gray trench coat, holding an old leather notebook, its cover worn, a faint scent of tobacco surrounding him. When I approached, he looked up, his eyes dark and deep, as if they had seen 100 stories both similar to and utterly different from mine. "Mrs. Cole?" I nodded. He stood up, shaking my hand. A firm handshake, neither long nor short, the way someone who has learned to keep secrets all their life might do it. We sat down. I ordered an espresso. He only took water. "What can I help you with?" His voice was deep, like old wood. Slow, steady, offering no pity, only clarity. I took a breath, pulled a file tied with black string from my bag, and placed it lightly on the table. "There are contracts in my name," I said, "but the signature isn't mine." He didn't speak immediately. He just opened the file, his fingers tracing the edge of the paper like a person reading a memory. The light caught the lenses of his glasses, reflecting back a silver streak. He gave a slight nod. "Purple ink pen, same type, same date." I nodded quietly. He gave me that pen. He looked up, his gaze both understanding and cold. "Sometimes," he said, "what people give you isn't meant to be kept, but to control." I fell silent, feeling as though someone had just voiced what I hadn't had the courage to admit. I handed him the documents with the unfamiliar signatures, handwriting that wasn't mine. When he set the last page down, I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but because for the first time, I was looking directly at the proof that my suspicions were not imagination. Rivera looked at me, his voice even and low. "You need evidence more than anger, Mrs. Cole. Don't let emotion cost you the most valuable asset: timing." I looked at him, seeing in those eyes what I hadn't possessed in a long time: composure. No false promises, no sympathy. Just a quiet belief in the process of truth. He promised to contact the forensics lab. I trusted his steadiness. I nodded, regaining my breath. "Thank you." He simply said, "Let me handle this part. But you need to prepare for all possibilities. Justice is never in a hurry." I offered a weak smile. "I don't need it fast. I just need it right." He looked at me, his gaze slow and somewhat respectful. "Then we're on the same side." When I left the cafe, the rain had stopped. The cold wind blew through the street, the scent of coffee and tobacco still clinging to my coat. I reached for the purple pen in my pocket, my fingers touching the cold metal. For the first time, I didn't tremble. I only saw clearly. The road ahead would be long, but at least I had started moving in the right direction. That evening I returned to the house by the sea. It was dark, the road along the cliff slick with rainwater. Headlights reflected on the wet asphalt like streaks of metal. I opened the door. The smell of salt and damp wood rushed in. The house was so quiet I could hear the distant waves, steady and heavy, like the heartbeat of someone sleeping restlessly. I walked past the living room, set down my bag, took off my coat, and stopped in front of the large mirror by the stairs. The overhead light shone down, reflecting a tired face, dark ringed eyes that still held a direct gaze. I stood there for quite a while, listening to the soft tick of the clock. Then, without thinking, I practiced speaking out loud to the mirror. I will tell everything, even if no one believes me. The words came out, slightly shaky at the end, but it was my voice. For the first time, I spoke what I truly felt out loud, not for anyone else to hear, but for myself to believe. I repeated it a second time, a third. Each time, my voice was firmer, less trembling. Outside, the wind blew harder, the curtain gently fluttering like a breath. I felt as if the house itself was listening. I turned off all the lights, leaving only one faint golden glow in the living room. The waves outside crashed against the rock as if counting the time I was deceived. With every wave, water sprayed up white and then vanished, like the times I believed him, intensely, real, and then shattered. I leaned against the wall, listening to the wind whistle through the crack in the door. In the darkness, I realized everything was still in its place. The chair, the wedding photo frame, the unwashed wine glass. Only I was different. I opened the desk drawer and took out the purple pen. The weak light reflected on the metal body, the purple streak cold like a dry scar. I turned the pen, clicking it once. That sound no longer soothed me. It only reminded me that silence was also a form of complicity. I sat down, opened my notebook, and began to write. Not a letter, not a diary, but everything I could remember. Every date, every number, every phone call. Each word written was a long sigh, but a little lighter. I wrote until my hand ached, then closed the notebook, resting my head against the back of the chair. In front of me, in the dark glass of the window, my reflection stared back. The woman who was still standing, only now aware of her own fearful silence. Before, I was afraid of losing him. Now, I was afraid of losing my own voice, the only thing I had left to prove that I was here, that I had loved, that I had been betrayed, and that I was still breathing. I looked out, where the sea and sky merged into a dark expanse. With every wave crashing against the cliff, I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3. Each number felt like a milestone I needed to pass before dawn arrived. When I stood up, turning off the light, the small click sounded one last time, like a silent promise that, from now on, I would no longer let silence speak for me. The forensics lab was on the 3rd floor of an old building near the harbor. The smell of sea salt mixed with paper and chemicals, an aroma both familiar and distant, like memories stored in a metal drawer. I stood looking through the frosted glass where a young woman was bent over a laboratory table, holding a small microscope. Her name was Natasha Brooks. Her blonde hair was pulled back, her lab coat dusted with faint purple ink streaks. When I walked in, she didn't look up immediately, only murmured, "Give me a second." A few seconds later, she raised her head, her eyes bright under the white light. "This pen model has been out for 6 months." I blinked. 6 months? That's right, the new G2 line, improved gel ink. The company just changed the formula. You said this contract was signed 8 months ago? I nodded. Natasha tilted her head, a thin smile briefly appearing on her lips. Then someone's timeline just broke. I looked at her, saying nothing. In the room, quiet enough to hear a pen rolling on the table, the small sounds felt like the whispers of truth. She placed the sample under a blue light, gently rotating it so I could see the different ink lines. One dark, one lighter, one with a subtle purple sheen. "This is the sample signed with your old pen," she said. "And this is the one they used to forge the signature. These two inks simply cannot be the same, even if the naked eye can't tell." I laughed, a strange sound in the middle of a war. The laugh was short, light, but I distinctly heard it break in my throat. Perhaps it was because I had been silent for so long. Or perhaps it was the realization that, after months of quiet observation, I had found an ally that couldn't lie. The small object nestled in my hand, once a symbol of love, now the undeniable proof. Natasha looked at me, her gaze both firm and warm. "It's funny, isn't it? Sometimes the smallest thing saves us." I quietly nodded, my lips still tasting the salt. "Justice is sometimes hidden in an ink trail thinner than a hair." She smiled. "Exactly." I look at the microscope, the light shining through the glass, dividing the lens into small fragments. In each piece I saw my reflection. No longer the woman waiting for a confession, but the one stepping out of the murky area of silence. Outside, waves crashed against the concrete wall, the sound steady and low. I suddenly thought, perhaps every wave is like a pen stroke, seeming to disappear, but actually leaving its trace on the stone. I turned to Natasha, my voice slow and clear. "Keep everything. The ink samples, the comparison sheets. I will need them." She nodded. "Of course. And Mrs. Cole?" I looked up. "Don't let him see you coming." I smiled. "Oh, he won't. He wrote his own indictment with the gift he gave me." The thought flashed through my mind as I looked at the purple writing on the contract, the smooth, curved ink line, chillingly familiar. He was the one who chose this pen, who handed it to me at the gala night, telling me to sign your dreams. And now, that very same pen had signed his guilt. I stood by the window, watching the seagulls circle against the gray sky. The feeling was both bitter and bright, as if all the shattered pieces in my mind had finally clicked into place. No need for interrogation, no need for confession. Just one tiny detail, enough to expose the entire map of lies. I whispered softly, "Thank you, Brandon, for making it easy." Natasha approached, handing me the envelope containing the forensic analysis. "Be careful," she said. "This gel ink fades quickly with direct light." I nodded, carefully placing it in the file folder. "Mr. Rivera will receive the complete copies tomorrow." "Good," I said, my voice low. "Let's make it official." She smiled, then left the room. I remained, alone in the cold white space, hearing the wind blow through the door crack. On the table, the purple pen still lay there, exactly where I had placed it, the faint metallic gleam reflecting under the fluorescent light. I picked up the pen, gently rotating it. The click of the pen sounded, the familiar sound, the one that used to make my heart clench, now rang out for the first time, and it no longer hurt. It was just the sound of the truth, crisp, dry, and conclusive. I pressed it again. Click. The sound echoed in the empty room, like confirmation that I had crossed the boundary between believing and seeing. The pen that was once a symbol of love had become evidence of betrayal. And in that reversal, I found myself strangely calm. No more resentment, no more anger. just the feeling of having completed a long equation and finally arriving at the correct answer. I took another envelope from my purse, the fit kind used by the detective agency. I collected the evidence envelope, my touch light, as if folding a healed wound. No one needed to see, no need to share. I only needed to know that I held the truth in my hands, and this time, I was the one holding the pen. When I left the room, I looked back one last time. The pen lay on the table, its purple body gleaming under the light, silently witnessing a script it had helped write. I turned off the light. In the darkness, I heard the distant waves and the click still echoing somewhere in my memory. No longer a promise, but an alarm clock, waking up the woman I had forgotten. The coffee shop was tucked away on a corner of Lombard Street, hidden behind a row of shedding sycamore trees. The afternoon light fell through the window, creating blurred golden streaks on the old wooden floor. Quiet jazz music played, the scent of roasted coffee mingled with cinnamon rolls, sweet yet deep. It was a place so peaceful that if anyone looked in, they wouldn't guess the two women in the corner once shared the same storm. I met Jennifer, his ex-wife, in that quiet cafe. She arrived early, sitting by the window, holding a cappuccino cup, her brown hair neatly tied back, her face makeup-free but possessing an edge that was sharper than I remembered. When I approached, she looked up and offered a thin smile. "Elena." "Jennifer." We shook hands, a handshake neither cold nor warm, just enough to acknowledge that both of us had moved far beyond the old definitions: first wife, second wife, before, after. The waiter set down my espresso. The steam rose, forming a thin cloud between us, like the boundary of silence. She spoke first. "He always had an escape plan." Her voice was husky, tinged with a mix of fatigue and a half-smile of resignation. I looked up. "I assume you've heard the phrase, 'I just need more time'?" Jennifer gave a faint laugh, tilting her head. "Every single time." She took a sip of her coffee, her gaze distant. "He knows how to say things that make women believe they are being chosen, when in reality they are just temporarily filling a void he's afraid to face." I didn't reply. I looked into my cup, the milk foam completely dissolved, leaving only a dense black color. "He once told me," Jennifer continued, "that you were stronger than anyone he'd ever met." I believed him, until I discovered he said the exact same line, to someone else. I quietly nodded. "Sounds familiar." The atmosphere between us wasn't tense. On the contrary, it was strangely calm, as if both of us had passed through the same door, just at different times. We looked at each other, no tears needed. Each of us had died once. The death of faith, of what we thought was love, of the person we thought would stay. She said, "He took 2 years from me, and from you, maybe more." "I still have the house and my work," I replied. She smiled, her eyes softening. "So that's how we measure the damage, by what's left over." Outside, the wind nudged the door, making a small chime sound. The golden light glanced across Jennifer's face, making me realize that although her voice was low and her eyes were tired, there was something in them that I, too, had just rediscovered. The clarity after the pain. We sat quietly, neither needing to say more. In that moment, I understood. Sometimes, the only person who can truly understand your pain isn't a lover, but someone who was wounded in the exact same way. We decided to end the cycle of victims, not through an oath, not through clasped hands, but through a simple nod between two women who were tired of being made to doubt themselves. Jennifer pulled a brown envelope from her purse and placed it on the table. "I still have a few papers he left behind. Copies of joint accounts, old contracts. I thought you might need them." I looked at her, pausing slightly. "Are you sure?" "Completely." Her voice was raspy but firm. "It's enough, Elena. We both let him define us. Not anymore." I took the envelope, feeling it was heavier than its actual weight.
Not because of the paper, but because of the past. Thank you, I said. Jennifer smiled. Don't thank me. Just end it for both of us. We sat still for a few more minutes. Outside, the rain began to patter, as if marking a new beginning. Each drop fell on the window pane, drawing small diagonal lines that merged and vanished. The streetlight reflected through the moisture, spreading a faint streak of light, like memories being washed away. I felt lighter, not because of forgiveness, but because for the first time, my pain had a name, a witness.
An acknowledgement. When Jennifer stood up, she placed a hand on my shoulder. He wasn't your only mistake, she said. But he's probably your biggest lesson. I nodded, offering a small smile. And yours? How I learned to trust myself again. The sentence was soft yet profound. Something one can only say after walking through fire. She left the cafe. I stayed, watching the thick rain outside. Beside the cold espresso cup, the brown paper envelope lay still. I opened it, seeing the bank statements, call logs, a few blurry photos. Each detail was a puzzle piece, slowly revealing the true face of the man who once slept beside me every night. I took a long breath, gathered the documents, put them in my bag, and stepped outside. The wind carried the scent of the sea, cold and salty, touching my skin like an awakening shock. I thought, perhaps that is the smell of freedom. Not sweet, not pleasant, but true. I went home and rewrote my statement. Not to accuse a man, but to document how a woman was born a second time, from the ashes of silence. The desk lamp shone down on the white paper. I picked up the pen and began to write. The date, the time, the location. Every single detail. Each word, a slice carved from the heart. But instead of blood, only clarity remained. Outside, the waves crashed against the shore. I heard its rhythm matching my writing. Click. I pressed the pen, paused, watching the final line dry on the paper. Then I quietly said, just loud enough for myself to hear, "This time, you won't get away with it." The courtroom was packed, row upon row of wooden benches, the heat of bodies and the smell of paper files mixing in the dry, heavy air. The white light stripped away all pretense, harsh, direct, exposing every expression, no matter how small. I sat in the front row, my hands clasped, a deep calm within me, quiet enough to clearly hear the clerk signing documents. Brandon sat on the other side, dark suit, deep blue tie, his face completely devoid of fatigue. It was as if this weren't a trial, but just another presentation he was used to. He spoke, people believed. He smiled, the world softened. In front, a line of reporters and a few acquaintances from the business world whispered. Each camera flash was like a light cutting across the air, cold, blinding, indifferent. His lawyer stood up. His voice was even, professional, with a touch of feigned warmth. Your Honor, my client is a devoted husband, a loyal and trustworthy partner. He bore the majority of the family's finances, supported his wife during the years she developed her company, and never took any action for personal gain. I remained still. No reaction, no frown. I had been instructed by Rivera. Don't let emotion lead the way. The truth doesn't need to shout. I looked straight up at the bench, the white light blurring my vision slightly. The lawyer continued. Ms. Elena Cole, during the management of their assets, repeatedly asked her husband to sign on her behalf, grant proxy, and use joint accounts. My client only followed her request out of trust and responsibility.
A few people in the room nodded. I heard the faint scratching of a pen, the soft shifting of a chair. I offered no defense. I simply observed, like an outsider watching a play in which I was once the lead. He sat there, face composed, his fingers lightly tapping the armrest of the chair. An old habit. Every time he was under stress, he did that, as if keeping the rhythm for his own words. Then he stood up. Without waiting his turn,
Without looking at his lawyer, the light shone directly onto his face, clearly cutting every feature. His voice rang out, deep and firm, the same voice that once made me believe every promise. She owes me everything. The room went silent. The sound echoed off the walls, bouncing back into my head like the shattering of glass. He continued, slowly, one word at a time. I helped her when she had nothing. From the first piece of software, from the scribbled business plans. Without me, there would be no company named Coltech today. I looked at him, not with the gaze of someone attacked, but with cold curiosity. It was strange. When people lie so well, they start to believe they are the victim. I didn't respond, just placed my hand on the file beside me, where the purple ink forensic report lay, heavy, but certain. I knew that in a few hours, no one in this room would believe the words he had just spoken. The murmurs spread like a cold draft. A few people in the gallery turned and looked at each other. Whispers rose from the back rows, mixed with the steady whir of the ceiling fan. She owes him? What about the evidence? I thought she was the victim. The sounds are small, but enough to make my skin crawl. I remained still, my eyes fixed on Brandon's back as he continued speaking, his voice growing more confident, as if he were standing on his own stage. She took my ideas, he said. I just want fairness. I sacrificed everything for this marriage, for her, and now she wants to destroy me. The words fell onto the wooden floor, shattering, hitting the wall, then returning to me like a dull knife blade. I clenched the envelope, feeling the paper edge cut into my palm. Inside were tiny things, light as a breath, a forensic report, a few magnified photos of handwriting, and a line of silvery purple ink. Yet, I felt the entire past trembling in my hand. Every pen click, every signature, every trusting night was compressed into this piece of paper. I remembered the night he put the pen in my hand, saying, "Sign it. All you have to do is trust me." Now, every word of that came back clearly, like wet, undried ink. On the other side, my lawyer stood up. He gave me a slight nod, signaling. I knew what that meant. It was time. My heart beat slowly. I inhaled, then exhaled, feeling as if the entire room was holding its breath toward me. In my mind, there was only one sound left. Click. When the gavel struck, I knew. It was time for the pen to speak for me. The sound of the gavel was deep and final, cutting across the space like a boundary between silence and truth. All eyes turned to me. I stood up, still holding the envelope, and walked slowly to the witness stand. My hand trembled slightly, but my voice did not. "I don't wish to argue about love," I said, my voice calm. "I only want to show the court a simple truth. The person who signed that contract was not me." Brandon looked at me, his eyes blinking once, his smile freezing. I opened the envelope, took out the paper, and handed it to my lawyer, Rivera. He placed it on the judge's desk, along with Natasha Brooks's report. The entire room was deadly silent. Only the sound of the clerk's pen remained, slow, steady, like the heartbeat of this very story. The white light from the ceiling still shone down, but this time I wasn't blinded. I only saw clearly, for the first time in years, that my voice no longer trembled when facing him. I had been silent long enough. Now, it was the pen's turn to speak.
I stood up. The wooden chair scraped softly against the floor, a dry sound like a surgical cut. No one spoke, not even Brandon. I took a deep breath, keeping my back straight. Your Honor, may I present my case? My voice rang out, clear and strangely calm. After months of retreating into silence, I finally heard my true voice. Unwavering, unbegging, only certainty. The courtroom fell silent. There was only the sound of wind slipping through the doorway, rustling the heavy drapes, gently shaking the chandelier on the ceiling. The air seemed to freeze, every gaze fixed on me. Judge Wong looked up, her eyes sharp like a blade just drawn from its sheath. Ms. Cole, she said, do you have anything to add? I only wish to show the court something he cannot explain. I turned to Rivera. He nodded, then took a sealed file from his briefcase and handed it to the clerk. A young forensics expert approached the witness stand. She wore a white lab coat, gloves, and a small name badge pinned to her chest. Natasha Brooks. I felt my heart contract for a single beat, a mix of anxiety and the certainty that this was the point of no return. The judge gestured. Ms. Brooks, please present your findings. The room was brightly lit under the overhead lamps, and Natasha's voice rang out, clear, steady, without a hint of hesitation. My forensic report confirms the pen used to sign the disputed contract is a G2 pen, a new model, manufactured 12 months after the contract date. The entire room held its breath. The last sound of her sentence echoed like a stone dropped onto a still lake, creating a ripple that spread out, touching everyone. I looked at Brandon. He stood straight, his face beginning to contort for a brief second, his eyes darting quickly, then attempting to regain composure, but his hands were already clenched on his lap. Natasha continued. I have supporting documentation from the pilot company with the release date,
along with the ink sample analyzed using a spectroscope. Both confirm the pen used in the contract could not have existed at the time Miss Cole was allegedly forced to sign. She looked up, staring directly at Brandon, her voice colder. Therefore, that signature cannot be hers. A small quiet, God, escaped someone in the room, then vanished into the space. I didn't turn around. I only looked at the man who once held my hand through every storm, now standing in the light, with nowhere left to hide. The white light from above still shone down, but now it no longer felt blinding. It only clearly illuminated the fragile line between truth and deception, between the man who once told me he loved me and the man now trembling before justice. Everyone was silent. The silence was so thick I could distinctly hear a pin dropping, the slight creaking of a wooden chair, and the staggered breathing from a corner of the room. I didn't look around, only straight at Brandon. The white light on him made his face seem to fracture, one half still trying to maintain composure, the other melting into fear. I thought I heard his heart break into pieces. Not a real sound, but the sound I recognized at the moment someone realizes everything is over. The dry, hollow break of power and lies. His lawyer stood up, his voice cracking. Objection! This report has not been cross-verified. But Judge Wong raised her hand, cutting him off. That's enough, Mr. Parker. She leaned back, looking through her glasses at the file, then turning her gaze to Brandon. For a moment, I saw her look soften. Not pity, but the sadness of someone who has seen too many identical endings. She gave a faint, cold laugh. Mr. Cole, do you know what I hate most in this courtroom? Brandon did not answer. People who think they can use love to cover up their crimes. Then she turned to the bailiff standing near the door, her voice clear, firm, and final. Arrest him. The click of the handcuffs echoed, soft yet sharp, like metal touching memory. Brandon turned his head, his eyes meeting mine for a brief second. No more arrogance, no more anger, just the absolute emptiness of a man who realized he had no one left to lie to. I stood still, No triumph, no trembling, no desire for anyone to see me as the victor. Only a single sensation washed over me, light and clear like the first breath after a long cough. I wasn't celebrating. I just felt I could finally breathe. The air in the room was still thick, but I felt light. As if for all those years, I had held my breath to keep everything still, and now, finally, I could inhale without fear. Rivera looked at me, giving a slight nod. The nod of someone who understands that justice never soothes pain. It only restores balance to the truth. I left the courtroom as the late afternoon light streamed through the corridor. The sound of my shoes echoed on the stone floor, dry, steady. Each step a new breath. Outside it was about to rain. The scent of ozone was sharp and cold. The smell of a chapter finally closed. The handcuffs locked, the click echoing like the closing of a scripture. The sound wasn't loud or jarring, but it lingered long enough to remain in the air. Everyone in the courtroom was silent. A few people gasped, a few averted their eyes, as if witnessing the collapse of a statue that had stood in the town square for too long. Brandon did not resist. He simply stood there, hands behind his back, his collar slightly askew, his face deathly pale. A police officer placed a hand on his shoulder, leading him slowly down the center aisle. Each of his footsteps echoed faintly, steadily, like a clock counting down the end of a small era in someone's life. As he passed me, the light from the door shone, illuminating his eyes. He turned, his eyes red. "You think you've won?" His voice was hoarse, both tired and bitter. No more cunning. None of the cold control that once made people believe he commanded everything. Only the resentment of someone who refused to admit that the only thing he lost was not money, but power over others. I looked at him, neither angry nor afraid. A part of me, the part that once loved him, suddenly felt pity. But that pity couldn't redeem anything. It was only enough for me to say the sentence I had held inside for all those long months. "No," I replied softly, my voice almost a whisper, but every word clear. "I just woke up." He stood still for a few seconds, his face contorted, his eyes blinking rapidly, as if trying to grasp something his mind refused to accept. Then he let out a short, hollow laugh, the sound of a spiritless echo. "You always thought you were different," he said. "But in the end, you wanted to win like them too." I looked at him, the light reflecting in my eyes, making his image distorted, as if reflected on water. "I don't need to win," I said slowly. "I just need to stop losing to myself." The officer pulled him away. His silhouette gradually disappeared down the corridor, where the metal door waited open. The entire building returned to silence. Only the sound of signing pens, rustling papers, and receding footsteps remained. I stood there, watching the metal door close behind him, feeling as though I had just witnessed the end of a dream. Not a beautiful one, but one necessary for waking up. In my mind, the click of the handcuffs still echoed, repeating itself, like the final beat of a song that had played for too long. The police led him away, the hallway light swallowing his shadow, one step at a time, slow, echoing softly on the cold stone floor. Each time he vanished around a corner, the light swallowed another part of his darkness, until there was nothing left but a streak of light stretching out like a faded scar. The metal door closed, making a dry clank, the sound that ended all the years I thought were my life. I stood there, my hand still resting on my coat pocket, where the purple pen lay still. There was no applause, no cheering, no rush of reporters, no fireworks, just the draft of air blowing away the scent of fake cologne and old fear, the smell of painted wood, old paper, the cologne he used to wear, the scent that once made me remember, now became a reminder that all lies have a smell. We just don't notice it when we are in love. The wind swept through the hallway, carrying the rustle of papers, making my coat hem sway slightly. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of the new air fill my lungs, the smell of metal, distant rain, of freedom yet to be named. Rivera walked past, stopping for a moment. "Are you all right?" I don't know, I said, my voice calm, but I think I'm about to be. He nodded, a faint smile. People usually only start breathing again when they accept that they were being choked. I let out a soft, genuine laugh, and I just took my first breath. He patted my shoulder, then walked away. His footsteps echoed steadily, fading away in the long corridor. I looked around, the white walls, the wooden doors, the fluorescent lights casting cold illumination. Everything was the same, only I was different. I stood there, neither smiling nor crying, feeling my heart become as flat as the sea after a storm. A stillness that wasn't numbness, but the peace that follows exhaustion. I touched my chest, where my heart still beat, slow and steady. No more chaos, no more trembling. Outside the window it began to rain. Small drops fell on the stone steps, dissolving instantly upon impact. I heard a very faint click in my pocket, the pen brushing against the metal clasp, a reminder that everything that once hurt me was now merely evidence. I walked out of the courthouse, looking up at the gray sky opening before me. For the first time, I wasn't afraid to keep going. I only felt empty. But it was an emptiness that held room for a new breath. 6 months later, as winter just touched the bay, the morning newspaper was thrown onto the porch, lightly damp with dew. I made coffee, walked out to retrieve it, and dried it with my sleeve. On the front page of the Law and Business section, a bold headline took up half a column. Brandon Cole sentenced to 5 years for corporate document forgery. No photo, no quotes, just a short segment reporting the verdict. 5 years, neither long nor short. Enough time for him to learn how to live without an audience. I read to the end of the last line, my eyes calm. The typeface was neat, cold, mechanical. I folded the paper, feeling no joy, no triumph, just closing a chapter. The paper made a soft rustling sound, like someone shutting a door. I carried it into the kitchen, placing it on the counter. The coffee had cooled, the still surface reflecting the dim overhead light. I sat down, wrapping both hands around the mug, letting the lingering warmth soak into my skin. The feeling wasn't victory, but a gentle emptiness, like when a storm has passed, but the scent of salt and wind still lingers in the air. A cold draft rushed in through a slightly ajar window. I stood up, crossing the living room. The early light poured through the blinds, coating everything in a faint hue, like a faded photograph. In that light, the house seemed too large. The leather chair where he used to read the paper. The guitar he promised to learn but never touched. The landscape painting he claimed he bought in Carmel, actually a cheap print. I began to clean the house. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I refused to live among the remnants of a story that was over. I opened a cabinet drawer and pulled out each item. A wristwatch, a wool scarf he'd forgotten, a few old hotel receipts. Everything was placed into a cardboard box, taped shut and set by the door, waiting for the garbage collector. With each item leaving my hand, it felt like one less thread wrapped around my chest. In the corner of the room, I saw a dusty silver photo frame. Inside was a picture of my mother, taken in the old garden in Portland. She was smiling, holding a bouquet of lavender. The photo was slightly crooked, the glass scratched, but her smile was intact. I kept my mother's frame. Not just because she was the only one who never lied to me, but because it was proof that real love existed. I had just looked for it in the wrong place. I wiped the frame with the edge of my coat, each movement slow and gentle, as if afraid of scratching the memory further. In that moment, I recalled those small afternoons, when my mother would sit by the window sewing and teaching me a simple lesson. Don't be afraid of being lonely, my dear. The worst fear is living a life untrue to your own heart. I laughed back then, thinking she was only talking about youth. Now I understood. It was a lesson for a lifetime. I rehung the frame on the wall, right where the morning light could reach it. As the sun rose higher, the rays passed through, casting the frame's shadow onto the wall. Small, fragile, but clear. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, watching the sunlight move inch by inch. Everything in the house was silent, only the soft ticking of the clock, as if counting every breath I had just learned to take again. On the counter, the newspaper was still open. The line with Brandon Cole faded as the light touched it, as if time itself wanted to erase what wasn't worth keeping. I didn't fold it back up. I just looked, then turned away. Because some chapters don't need a period. You just need to know you've finished reading. In the afternoon, as the light outside turned a pale honey color, the email notification chimed on my laptop. I opened it, finding only one new message. From Jennifer. The subject line was short, with no punctuation. Thank you. The body of the email contained only one sentence. Because of you, I can sleep peacefully. I sat still, my eyes lingering on that line for a long time. Not because it was emotional, but because I understood the feeling she was talking about. The feeling when sleep is finally no longer a battle between guilt and fear. A woman who was lied to, and then made to believe she was the one at fault, could finally lie down without waking up startled in the middle of the night. That was the simplest form of justice. I hit reply. The cursor blinked for a moment before I began to type. We are both awake now. I stopped, reread it. Nothing more was needed. I hit send. A soft, clean whoosh sound like a breath passing without leaving a mark. I closed my laptop, stood up, and opened the window. The sea breeze rushed in, salty, carrying the smell of kelp and damp wood. Night was falling, the pine trees outside the porch swaying gently. I thought about Jennifer, about myself, about women like us. Those who once believed beautiful words until they learned that the truth needs no ornamentation. Near my desk, the lamplight illuminated a small gleaming object. On the table, the purple pen lay still, no longer a weapon, just a pen. I walked over and picked it up. The barrel was cool, light, stripped of the heavy weight of memory. I rotated it gently, click. The familiar sound rang out. No longer the rhythm of my injury, but the confirmation that I had walked the full path I needed to walk. I set the pen down, this time not next to a file or a deposition, but on a new notebook. The first page was blank. I didn't know yet what I would write, perhaps fragments of memories, or simply a list of things I wanted to do just for myself. But I knew for sure, when this pen touches the page, it will no longer write about loss. It will write about return. I turned off the light and stepped onto the porch. Outside, the new moon had risen, its light thin and soft on the ocean's surface. The waves were gentle, steady, like a final lullaby of the day. I leaned against the railing, letting out a long sigh. No more hatred, no more longing, only the quiet space where I was allowed to be myself, unsupervised, debt-free, with no one writing my story for me. In that small house by the sea, I heard what I hadn't realized in years. Silence isn't scary, if it's the silence of freedom. I made coffee. Morning light poured into the kitchen through the thin curtains, the early rays settling on the countertop like a thin layer of dew. The kettle whistled softly, then fully boiled, the sound of the popping bubbles sounding like the steady breathing of a new day. I poured the water into the filter, listening to the rushing water, the clink of the spoon against the cup, the melody of serenity. No background music was needed, no words, just simple sounds filling the small room. The slight creak of the wood,
the wind slipping through the window frame, the slow, authentic sound of my own breath. I sat down, taking the first sip. The coffee was slightly bitter, but it was the bitterness I chose, no longer the aftertaste of anxiety. I looked through the window. The distant sea was a silver color, gleaming like a flat mirror. Above it, seagulls spread their wings, so free that I felt myself lighten too. I realized peace isn't about having someone hold you. It's when you stop being afraid of being alone. I used to think happiness was having someone sit across from me at every meal, a hand to hold when night fell. Now I understood. Happiness is just being able to sit by yourself and still feel complete. Peace doesn't come from the presence of others. It comes when you stop being afraid of the emptiness within yourself. It took me years to understand that. In the months after the trial, I learned to cook for one, to choose the movies I liked, to walk along the beach without having to explain why. There were afternoons when I stopped by the row of pine trees, watching the sunlight filter through the leaves, and realized, sometimes, the world doesn't need us to be strong. It just needs us to be real. A new email popped up on my laptop screen. The subject line, Coltech, Transition Plan. I opened it, reading through the plan I had written the night before. Transferring management rights, delegating operational authority, and share distribution.
I had been thinking about this for weeks, and today, with the light shining on the desk, I knew it was time. I distributed the company shares to the people who had survived with me. Not because they needed it, but because I owed them something greater than money. I owed them trust. These were the people who stood by me when rumors spread, when shareholders left, when the press rewrote the story from the supposed winner's perspective. They didn't abandon me. They believed. And they deserved it. I typed the final few lines, saving the document. Their names appeared on the screen. Sophia, head of finance. Marcus, software engineer. And even Kelly, the young assistant who brought me coffee every morning when I couldn't bear to leave my desk. When it was complete, I hit send. The email sent notification sounded small, but I felt as if I had just set down a heavy burden. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the half-empty coffee mug. The light shone through it, reflecting clearly on the dark liquid. Outside, the waves gently beat against the shore, the smell of the sea still mixed with the wind. Everything was old, familiar. But for the first time, I found it beautiful in the most ordinary way. I didn't need anyone to accompany me to feel it. One early autumn morning, I was invited to speak at a conference on women and leadership. The hall was downtown, glass walls reflecting the sunlight and the passing crowd. The rows of seats were neatly arranged, cameras were ready, and young faces looked up at the stage with the same expression: curiosity and ambition. When the host introduced me, I heard scattered but sincere applause. I walked out, still holding the purple pen. Not as a symbol, but simply an old habit I couldn't quite let go of. The spotlight shone directly, slightly blinding, but I wasn't afraid. I stood at the microphone, took a long breath, and smiled. Someone once told me, I began slowly, that a contract is just paper. But I learned that it's not. Reading a contract is like reading a person's heart. If they use words to bind you, you can use the truth to set yourself free. A light ripple of laughter went through the audience, mixed with a few claps. I continued. In every line, every clause, there is always the shadow of the person who wrote it. The honest leave room for trust. The deceitful prepare their escape route. And if we trust the sweet voice too much, we won't hear the real words hidden in the silences. The hall grew quiet. Someone cleared their throat, then a few quiet sniffles. I saw a young woman in the second row sitting with her head bowed, long brown hair, her face slightly blurred under the light. When the talk ended, she walked toward me. The young woman took my hand. "Thank you for telling your story." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were bright. "I used to think I was weak for forgiving the person who hurt me. But listening to you, I understand. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's courage." I squeezed her hand, smiling gently. "You know, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's being afraid and still moving forward." She nodded, tears falling quickly as if afraid of changing her mind. Afterward, I stayed behind as almost everyone left. The late afternoon golden light streamed through the window, casting long, smooth, silk-like streaks on the wooden floor. I bent down, signing a few documents for the organizers. The pen glided over the paper smoothly and surely. No more trembling, no more breaking mid-stroke. I smiled. The scar in my heart was now a sign of strength. Like skin that has healed after a wound. It doesn't disappear, but it no longer hurts. And I understood. That scar was proof that I had lived truly, that I had loved, that I had broken, and that I had stood back up with my own 2 hands. I put the pen in my pocket and stepped outside. The wind carried the scent of early rain. Amidst the departing crowd, I heard laughter, footsteps, the sound of life flowing around me again. And I knew I had returned to life. No longer the person left behind, but the one who chose to move on. I stood before the ocean. Dawn was breaking. The water was hazy with mist, a silvery light spreading slowly from the horizon like a soft greeting. Waves gently rolled onto the shore, then receded, leaving thin, even lines on the sand, like delicate stitches. The scent of salt and seaweed mixed with the early fog, lightly touching my skin, cool and real. I withdrew my hands from my coat pockets, letting the wind pass between my fingers. The morning mist was thin like the earth's breath, silent, warm, and alive. Behind me, the small wooden house sat still, a faint wisp of smoke rising from the chimney. I had lived here for almost a year, in days no longer defined by work or roles, but simply by the fact that every morning I could stand still, breathe, and not be afraid. When I first arrived, I was still dazed, like someone who had just escaped an accident, lost in new freedom. Every sound made me jump. Every strong gust of wind, I thought someone was calling. Now the sound of the waves no longer frightened me. It only repeated the same story. Everything passes, even the pain. I bent down and picked up a small seashell. The inside still gleamed with a purple sheen, spreading like diluted ink, the color that reminded me of the pen in my coat pocket. I turned the shell in my hand, watching the sun slowly rise. The wind carried away the pieces of my life I had locked away. I didn't try to hold on. I didn't hold on to memories or people, or the image of the man who once made me believe that love meant acceptance. I let the wind do its work, take away what had expired, and leave behind what I never knew I had: lightness. Far away, a few seagulls shrieked, then dove into the water, the rustling of their wings faint. I looked at them, wondering when I stopped envying what was free. Perhaps it was when I realized you don't need to fly to be free. Sometimes, you just need the courage to stand still, without bowing your head. I spread the old wool blanket on the sand and sat down. The waves lapped near my feet, cold and soft. I took a worn leather journal and the purple pen from my pocket. I lightly tapped the pen cap against the edge of the journal. Click, click. A small sound, but it rang clear in the open space. The small, clear sound of a heartbeat returning. No longer the pulse of panic or fear. It was the rhythm of someone who is truly alive, authentic, and peaceful. I opened the first page, the first line I wrote. The day I learned to trust myself again. The purple ink spread across the page, even and steady. I watched the words appear, seeing that they no longer trembled, no longer drifted like the years I tried to write in the dark. Below, I continued. Nothing was lost, only the unnecessary things. I paused, looking out at the sea. The sun was fully up, the light growing warmer, spilling onto the sand, shining through the crests of the waves like 1,000 shards of glass. The wind touched my hair, carrying the murmur of the water. The wind and life flowing in the right direction. I gently closed my eyes, listening to my own breathing merge with the rhythm of the waves. For the first time, I didn't think about the past, nor the future. There was only the present, bright, calm, and real. The pen lay in my hand, as light as when I first received it, but now it belonged to no one else. I chuckled softly, not out of joy, but out of a deep calm that made the sound of laughter feel like another way to breathe. On the water's surface, the light reflected back, blurring my vision, leaving only the sensation that I was truly present, not for anyone, not for anything, but simply for myself. I sat looking at the page, the purple writing still wet, reflecting the morning light. The waves continued to surge and withdraw, steady, like the ocean's breath, patient, unhurried. I took a long breath, and in that silence I whispered to myself, forgiveness. Not for him, but for me. I didn't need him to find peace, nor did I need his remorse. Forgiveness, to me, was no longer an outward action. It was the gentle act of loosening the threads I had tied around my own heart. I had carried him for all those long months, like a sentence I mistook for responsibility. Now, I put it down. That was all it took. I closed the notebook, placing the pen on top. The wind blew past, lifting a corner of the page, causing the cover to flip up and fall back down, creating a tiny flick, a sound so subtle that if one wasn't paying attention, it might be mistaken for a wave. I smiled softly. No background music needed. The story sang within me. The melody had no high notes, no lyrics, only a series of small sounds, pen meeting paper, the waves, the heartbeat, and amidst all those sounds, I heard something very familiar, my own voice, no longer trembling, no longer asking permission to exist. I stood up, brushed the sand from my hands, and put the notebook and pen into my jacket pocket. In the distance, the sun was higher, erasing the thin layer of mist. Everything was illuminated, not brightly, just clearly and sufficiently. I walked along the water's edge, letting the waves touch my ankles. Cold, but real. A voice rose within me, not shouted, not a declaration, just a simple, certain conclusion, like a final period. When the pen spoke, I became free. The sentence left my lips, light as a breath, then dissolved into the wind. The sea still sang, the wind still blew, and I walked on, without looking back. Behind me, the footprints in the sand were washed away by the waves, little by little, as if the ocean was whispering, "It's okay, you can start over." And I smiled, truly smiled, no longer afraid of silence, no need for proof, no one else needed to guard my heart anymore. There was only me, an ordinary woman, with a purple pen in her pocket and a clarity in her heart vast enough to write the rest of her new life. Perhaps everyone has loved the wrong person once, and trusted the wrong person too. But in the end, what remains is not the pain, but how we rise after being betrayed by our own belief. I tell this story not for pity, but so that anyone who has fallen knows we can still start over, even when there's no one left standing on our side. If you've ever had to choose between forgiving someone else and forgiving yourself, leave a comment below. I want to know what you chose, and why. And if you believe in true stories, where people still find the light after the darkness, please subscribe to this channel, because there are many more things I want to share with you. Stories about trust, loss, and the way we find our path back to ourselves.